Okay, we can apply the same insight to the data that the Aristotelians and the Copernicans were looking at. So they were both looking at the same data. They had 6 planets that they were looking at. This is obviously not completely accurate, but you get the idea. So they were looking out at the universe, of the known universe anyway, and they had these planets. And the Aristotelian paradigm looked at them this way, and the Copernican paradigm looked at them this way. But it wasn't changing the actual world for them. So Kuhn isn't promoting this kind of radical idealism where the world itself changes. The world looks like this to both of them. It's just the way that they interpret the world that is changing. So it doesn't necessarily need to lead to any kind of skepticism. Okay? So what changes in a paradigm shift is not the world that you see, but the way you interpret what you see. And this is less true, however, with social phenomena because of so-called looping effects. This is the idea that the way we interpret social phenomena actually often changes them. So it's more complicated when it comes to social phenomena. Now, another important idea in Kuhn's philosophy of science is this idea of incommensurability. This is the idea that there is no common measure that you can appeal to when you're translating statements from, for example, the Aristotelian paradigm into the Copernican paradigm. And this really connects with a lot of the things that we've been talking about, these apparent gaps between different epistemic communities. Are we dealing with cases of incommensurability, for example, when we're talking about people who occupy, for example, an extremely conservative political epistemic community, as opposed to an extremely left-wing political epistemic community? Or is it not the same thing at all? So what does incommensurability mean? Well, we can think about our friend the duck rabbit again to try to get an idea of this. So to say that these two paradigms are incommensurable is kind of like saying this. Look at this figure and see a rabbit. So you see it looking to the right and you see a rabbit, right? Now, while you're looking at as a rabbit, try to see it as a duck. Try to see it as a duck and a rabbit and at the same time. And the idea is you can't fully see it as a rabbit and fully see it as a duck at the same time. And that's a kind of metaphor for thinking about what Kuhn means by incommensurability between paradigms. You can't see the world both ways simultaneously because they don't share a common measure that allows you to translate statements about the world understood in terms of Aristotle's paradigm into statements about the world understood in a Copernican paradigm. So again, same thing applies here. You can't look at the two different pictures of the solar system and see them both ways simultaneously. They are incommensurable. They don't have a common measure that allows you to translate statements from one into statements about the other. It's also worth noting that new paradigms often begin on really shaky ground. And that is one of the things that makes understanding scientific progress so difficult. So for example, when Galileo famously was going to trial for teaching that it was true that the sun was at the center of celestial rotation, that's something people usually don't note. You were allowed to talk about theories of heliocentricity. You just couldn't say that they were true. And Galileo was insisting that his ideas were true. But at the time, he couldn't even explain why things fell. And that was really embarrassing at his trial. People would drop things and say, well, Galileo, why did that happen? And they didn't have an explanation for like another 100 years. So paradigms build slowly around exemplary instances of doing science. And that's why it often makes it difficult to know in the present moment where we are with respect to scientific progress. And another thing worth noting, I think, is that it's really dangerous to exaggerate how often incommensurability actually happens. So when we use the word paradigm in the broad sense too liberally, we can really make it look like we're living in different worlds from each other when in fact we aren't. And I think that that was a major point in one of the very first things that we read together, this piece by Neil Levy, Partisan Worlds, where he was saying, look, people on the left and right don't occupy different worlds. That's an exaggeration. Their views are not incommensurable with each other in the sense that there is no common measure that would even give them a foundation for having a conversation. And I think that that's important to bear in mind. And I think Kuhn emphasized that, but that it has often been ignored by people who have sort of taken up and interpreted his work. So next week, we're going to talk about how from Kuhn, we get the birth of science studies of a totally new kind, and out of that, social epistemology, which, according to Naomi Oreskes, is going to kind of save the day when it comes to answering this question about why we should trust science. Thank you for your time and attention. I will see you soon.